Welcome back after the break. Well, unlike in the past when it was generally the dropouts or the jobless urban youth who joined the extremist outfits, lately the profile of the alleged terrorists has changed. More and more educated youth seem to be involved. There's growing concern about well-off people falling in the trap of terrorist outfits. Yes, it's the new face of terror that we are talking about. Right. So, in fact, if we just go a little back, tracing terrorism historically, we saw that it was once used by the oppressed to seek their rights. And now the definitions have changed. Moreover, because of the involvement of the youth who, the youngsters, in fact, if we see the newspapers, we see a few of them who are pursuing MBA, who have been gold medalists in economics, who are doing some or the other job, who are well profiled, in fact, well-settled youngsters. But there is a problem. Why is it that this kind of change has come? Or is it that the societal pressures have grown so much that we are not able to deal with this thing?
No, I'm sure social psychologists will come up with explanations. But, you know, well-bred people, well-educated, comfortable people becoming a part of some form of terror movement or violent movement is not unusual. It has happened during freedom struggle in this country. It has happened in the Irish Republican Army. It has happened in the Palestinian struggle. It is happening now in the current wave of terrorism. Now, first we must delink this from Islam. The moment we think that Islam and the roots are in Islam, we get confused politically and administratively. True Islam is peace-loving. True religion has nothing to do with this kind of mass murder and mayhem and terror.
Right.
And irrespective of the origins, if we do not tackle terror ruthlessly but within the framework of the Constitution, the country is in peril. Now, this whole notion that because the origins, there may be some causes here and there, sometimes even legitimate causes or plausibly legitimate causes, we have to wink at it is a very dangerous notion. We have a constitutional order. What is Constitution? It is the document that gives us an opportunity to reconcile our differences peacefully. And if Article 1 of the Constitution, which says that we are a union of states, if that fails, all other articles fail. Our friends who talk about Article 19 and freedoms, of course, freedom is incredibly important. But if the union itself disappears, where is the Constitution to defend? Where are the liberties to really protect you as a citizen? Therefore, extraordinary situations require extraordinary remedies, but within the broader framework of the Constitution. The second broad issue we have to look at is, what is the price we pay by being somewhat soft on these issues of terror?
Right.
The price we pay by a dismemberment of the country, as we've seen before in 1947, is far more horrendous than anything that you can envisage in terms of the curtailing of the human rights or liberty in containing terror, because India cannot afford that. What happened in 1947, 48, all of us, we know the historical baggage is still with us. And the third is, do we have a strong law, well enforced, and there is a system of accountability, or shall we have very soft laws and police and security forces habitually go outside the law, framework of law, indulge in fake encounters, brutal murders, killing in captivity? Is that the kind of state we want? You see in Mumbai and elsewhere, these whole encounter specialists. That's a very dangerous situation. The state or state machinery is compelled to resort to this extra-legal, extra-judicial and extra-constitutional methods habitually to maintain some kind of a status quo. It's a real danger. The danger is not in having a strong law but well enforced and making them fully accountable. The Supreme Court said in 1978, this is the problem of all governments, right from Plato's days till date. How do you empower a government to do its duty and yet hold it accountable so that it does not transgress? The court said very wisely, the wisdom of man has not yet been able to conceive of a government with the power sufficient to answer all the legislative needs and yet at the same time incapable of mischief. Power and mischief go together.
Right.
Now, just because there's likely mischief, you don't deny power when it's required. Otherwise, there's no reason for government, no reason for laws at all, no reason for constitution at all in the first place. How do you design institutions to try and curb that excessive power or abuse of power? And how do you ensure that there's real power required to really protect society? And that is what statesmanship is about.
Absolutely. With this, Mr. Dobal, I would like to come to you. Do you really concur with what Mr. Narayan said just right away, in fact?
I would tend to agree with him in some respect. You see, it is really difficult to define terrorism, of all points of time in history with one definition. Even today, if you look at the yardstick of defining terrorism, we are all talking about having a new law, tougher law, stronger law in place. Now, do we know what are the yardsticks to define the act of terror today? For example, there is a need, while religion is not important, I would say it is not important and right to look at an act of terror associated with a particular religion, but there is a need to look at Bombay riots or Gujarat riots, or even recently the burning of churches in Odisha and Karnataka. I think there is a need to look at that angle. So it is very difficult and very complicated to define terrorism. If you look, I happen to be in Palestine. If you look at Arafat, for example, he is the terrorist of yesteryears, but he won the Nobel Prize for Peace with Yitzhak Rabin.
No, but not talking
so
about
your terrorist could be my hero, and my hero could be your terrorist.
Well, so that's one of the notions which have been prevalent for years, in fact, for ages in the world over. But when we talk about legally defining terrorism so far, there have been wonderful reasons and wonderful things which have been quoted by Dr. Narayan also. Do you really concur with that?
See, the question is that we have to look at the terrorism. Are we really defining terrorism in the larger perspective, as we think that somebody who is attacking our country or its sovereignty or the social order as such, or something which arises out of socio-economic situation which is created in a state, where you say the Maoists or the communists and the problems which are arising in a particular, where you use these terrorist laws really to oppress those people, and there the question of really the police encounter or the police torture, etc., that comes. So therefore the question is, why something happens and we think of changing only the laws, immediately we go to the laws and say that we must change the laws. Why not this entire system which is responsible for it? And one is that we have been talking about police reforms. There is a judgment which has been given by the Supreme Court. Why the states are not implementing that? Why we don't have a machinery which is very, very efficient? And when you are working in an efficient way, the police machinery, and there is a problem you face really with law, then you debate it and say that yes, the law requires a change. Right. Not before that, not before doing an entire, you say no, I can't investigate a terrorist act because there is not adequate law. I don't agree with that.
But do you think the laws that we have, you agree to the point that we have sufficient laws?
Yes, I agree.
Okay, you agree to the point that we have sufficient laws, and police has also been, in fact, Mr. Marwa is quite readily interested in commenting on it.
First I would like to say that whatever be the objective, the goal of the terrorist, killing of innocent men, women and children can never be justified. So that should be the first thing which must be underlined. Once we go into the debate on that, there is a big goal behind it which is justified, then we will run into a lot of trouble. The second, a distinction needs to be made between a religion, Islam, and the jihadi ideology. Jihadi ideology today is, as I said earlier, is now influencing some youths in our country, and we have to deal with it. We can't wish away this reality. You mentioned about educated people coming to it. It is because of this ideology, and we have been too passive in not reacting to this danger which is now threatening our country and many other countries in the world. Thirdly, I think Mr. Parekh has very rightly mentioned that it's all right having laws, but what about the people who are going to enforce them? If that force is not a professional force on which people have faith and depend on, then we have a very big trouble. And this is why the police reforms which we have all been talking about, and the Supreme Court has given a directive almost 2 years ago. It's a directive, and yet both the center and the states, almost all the states, are trying to postpone them on one excuse or the other. I think it's criminal, and this is something we must look into it. Intelligence agencies. Intelligence agencies are getting so politicized that they are getting, most of their resources today are getting involved in political intelligence rather than hard intelligence which affects the security, unity and integrity of our country. We must look into these aspects.
But looking at the entire the scenario that we have right now, isn't it that we have developed this tendency of putting forth everything on the doorstep of, for that matter, ISI or Islams, and basically we have, are we really growing that tendency of almost neglecting the homegrown radicals that can be responsible for it?
Undoubtedly, within the country, we are creating conditions for the rise of anarchy and terrorism and violence and easy recourse to that. After all, political parties themselves are fostering violence. From a Rasta Roko to indulging in arson and loot or burning buses. What else is that except anarchy and terror? Except that you know the face of the people, except that they don't bomb people. We really are creating a very permissive climate in which anything goes. At the same time, extraterritorial links and therefore terrorism sponsored by these external agents cannot be ignored because it's a global phenomenon, as Mr. Mawa said and others said. But about the necessity of law and sufficiency of law, there's always a confusion in our minds about necessity versus sufficiency. Nobody can argue that a good law, a strong law in the statute books is sufficient. That it is necessary is a different matter. Many things go into rule of law, go into creating a stable and harmonious and peaceful and secure society. But it does not mean that we don't require strong and effective laws. Now, you take, for instance, the definition of terrorism. Mr. Rajiv Gandhi, a former Prime Minister, a leading Indian political leader, the leader of India's largest political party, was brutally assassinated by a terrorist outfit in 1991. It took us 7 years to convict the criminals. 7 years after a Prime Minister was brutally assassinated, there was no serious dispute as to who did it or why they did it. And yet, it took us 7 years. And after that, in 1999, what did the Supreme Court hold? That the Tada Act was so defective that it would not constitute as an act of terrorism. Therefore, they had to be convicted under Section 302 of the IPC, mere murder. A former Prime Minister of India. Why? Because there was no mens rea. Because there was no desire to wage war against the government of India, Union of India. And therefore, they were not terrorists. In that Nalini case, the Supreme Court.
Right.
Now, what does it show? That we are